Good morning. Welcome et bienvenue to this special webinar entitled How Digital Can Enable SME Recovery under Next Generation EU, hosted by Vodafone. My name is Joe Lyman. I present a show on the BBC called The Newsroom. Before that, for many years, I was a business correspondent on television and radio. First of all, I hope that all of you and your family and your close friends are well, and that you've avoided this awful virus which has taken so many lives and ruined so many livelihoods. That's especially the case for small and medium-sized companies, many of whom may never recover from the economic shutdown or lockdown that we have seen. This webinar is part of the European SME Week, and millions of people who work for or own SMEs are sharing their experiences of the crisis and how they have used it or intend using it, all of the EU funding schemes and grants to boost their business. What we are here today is to discuss how digitalization can help SMEs recover from this crisis. At the heart of this will be the SME report commissioned by Vodafone, which was published alongside Deloitte a few months back and available on this website. If you click the three little lines on the left of your screen, you'll be able to read all of it. It sets out how support from national governments and multinational organizations are vital drivers for growth for smaller businesses in Europe. We will be hearing a lot more about that from Vinod Kumar from Vodafone shortly, and one of the co-authors of the SME Digitalization report, Socrates Mokas from Deloitte. We'll get the legislator's perspective from Adriana Maldonado Lopez, who sits on the European Parliament's Committee for Internal Market and Consumer Protection. And we'll also hear from SMEs themselves and the boss of their representative body, Alban Majar. We'll also be hosting a virtual fireside chat with Vodafone Ireland and Ireland's employers group, IBEC. A word of warning, three Irishmen having a fireside chat that is usually very interesting, to put it mildly. Then we'll have a quick break and play a lovely video from the Italian group Deha to see how technology has helped them during lockdown. And then we'll have a substantial discussion from all corners of Europe debating what support SMEs can get from the EU and how best to use that support. Stay tuned for that. Now, we will not be doing this in a vacuum. Your participation is vital. Please use this site to post your questions in the Q&A section on the right-hand side. Check it out now. Have a think about what you'd like to ask our very interesting set of speakers and panelists. Start posting your questions now. Please tell us who you are, who you represent, if you represent someone, and you might even tell us who you wish the question to be directed to. And as they say in Scotland, shy bairns get nae sweets, or shy children don't get any sweets. So if you're too shy to ask a question, you won't get the answer that you're looking for. If you wish to comment on social media, Twitter or LinkedIn, please use the hashtags, hashtag EEPA_EU, which is part of the European Enterprise Promotion Awards. That's EEPA_EU and hashtag SME Digital Recovery. It's on the record, so please don't defame anyone. Please try to be nice. Before all that, I'd like to hear from a European lawmaker on how Next Generation EU, which is the COVID-19 bailout fund of 750 billion euros, will be helping SMEs to modernize and digitalize. Adriana Maldonado Lopez is a Spanish MEP who sits on the Parliament's Committee for the Internal Market and Consumer Protection, or IMCO. She has keen interest in the forthcoming Digital Services Act, which could change the digital landscape in Europe quite noticeably. And she regularly speaks up for small businesses, especially in the the wine-making part in our home region of Navarra in Spain. Adriana, buenos días y bienvenida. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much to invite me to this special event, and it's a huge pleasure for me being here with all of you. So thank you for inviting me to this event framing in the European Week of SMEs, which this year, from my point of view, is more than even and has a special meaning. I would like to start by highlighting some data that maybe all of you know, but I think that is important to overlook here. So in 2017, according to Eurostat, SMEs were the 99% of the business fabric at the European level. There are more than 25 million of SMEs in Europe, and also they represent more than 50% of the European GDP. All this supposes that we can affirm that SMEs is a fundamental pillar of our internal market in the European Union and also a huge pillar in all our economies. So for that reason, it's important to work together to increase and to support SMEs in the European Union. And this is what we try to do in the European Parliament during this mandate. It's very important to support SMEs, to listen there, and to work together to create a better legislation and create a better understanding of the recovery plan that we have now in the Parliament. So the COVID crisis has been an accelerate of these transitions. We need to put in the same level the SMEs and the ordinary companies or big companies, and also digitalization will be one of our more special items that we have to take into account in order to support SMEs. I would like to also to remark some works that we are making during these years in the European Parliament. As you know, in February we have a special debate in which we ask the Commission to concrete measures to provide our SMEs with the necessary tools, focuses on the European Green Deal and the digitalization transition. These two pillars, climate and European Green Deal and also digitalization transitions, are the both more important pillars that we have also in our recovery plan. And for that reason, it's important that SMEs understand and work in this direction. Our goal as legislator is to help SMEs in this adventure of digitalization, and I know also that companies at Vodafone can create a good environment between institution and company. For its part, the European Commission in March presents an SMEs strategy for a sustainability and digital Europe, in which it's meant to support SMEs in 3 areas. First of all, sustainable and digital transition. Secondly, doing business freely inside and outside our single market, and trying to eliminate all the red tapes, and also try to create a better access to finance. From our point of view as European Parliament, it's very urgent to increase sustainability to support SMEs in their process of digitalization transformation, and also to increase the capacity of innovation. We also must have the goal to reduce barriers and developing new productions and business models. For that reasons, the participation and committees for all the agents involved in this institutional level, public and private, is necessary. So it's very important for us to have a good environment and a very good dialogue, like for example, this kind of events with companies and the rest of the stakeholders in relation with SMEs. To be specified, there are some important legislative reforms, such for example, the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act is a very important directive that we negotiate just in the European Parliament, and now we are waiting for the European Commission paper in order to create a level playing field between the large company and dominate platforms in the market, and also to increase the access of SMEs. In relation with the crisis of the COVID-19, we know that the effects of in SMEs are very high. We know that has caused deep demands, not only socially and economically, but also to those SMEs that have to be unable to open their business all across Europe. in a lot of countries, as for example Belgium, or including Spain also, many companies and many SMEs have to close their business during a long period, and they have a lot of financial problems in this moment. For that reason, it's very important to understand as institution this problem and try to help them in the budget of the European Union and also in the recovery plan. All economists forecast war of the recession for the next year, and in the Eurozone we have also a lot of problems during the following years. The OCDE predicts in July that more than 50% of SMEs will not survive in these coming months. So this point is very important also for us, and we have to be convinced that we have to maintain our SMEs in actions. We have to maintain our SMEs open, and we try to help them in relation with the recovery plan. In the recovery plan, there are like 4 important issues, like European Green Deal, digitalization, as I said before, but also there are other issues that can help to SMEs to receive this financiation. For example, all in relation with young people and unemployment. Also for SME, it could be an important issue to take into account. Also, the role of women in SMEs, it could be included in this framework. So to sum up, I would like to say that there are several challenges that we must take into account. Adapting to the new reality, we need to promote the use of teleworking and adapting production process to new emerging technology. We need to promote digitalization. In today's world, the e-commerce is booming, and with consumers' habits that have radically changed in recent years, and of course during the pandemic, SMEs must adapt to the new reality. And us as legislator has the role to help them in this process of changing, over skills in digitalization, under skills in the new European Green Deal, for example. We need to help them and be closely. We also have the challenge to take advantage of new market trends, new market needs, being able to reinvent itself forward the fulfillment of the objectives of the Green Deal and environment transition, as I said before. And also we have to enhance digital skills, promote employment with improving knowledge in the digital field and the development of their work. To sum up, I would like to say that in the European Parliament, we also have a group of SMEs that we met frequently, and I invite to all the company and all SMEs that are hear me to be active in this kind of intergroup and try to have the European Parliament and the INCO committee as friends in order to debate and have a good conversation for different issues. We have a lot of challenges nowadays in relation with SMEs, in relation with the COVID crisis, and in relation with the recovery plan. We will have a lot of money in our hands, and we have to be intelligent in order to promote a better Europe and a stronger SMEs environment. Thank you so much.
Anna, thank you very much. And it's a little bit worrying that that statistic that you gave us about the OECD saying that 50% of SMEs may not survive this crisis. That's very worrying. We will be hearing from the OECD later on in the morning. So thank you very much, Adriana, for your contribution. I'm sure some of the support you mentioned there will be raised when we get into those panel discussions and the fireside chat a little bit later. But first, I'd like to hear the thoughts from Vinod who is Chief Executive of Vodafone Business. He's responsible for Vodafone's B2B operations globally. Before joining Vodafone, he was with Tata Communications, and it's his job to implement some of the suggestions here today and what SMEs need in order to digitalize? No pressure, Vinod. You'll also tell us a little bit about new technology which SMEs might find helpful in that regard, including the VHub. So, Vinod, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Firstly, I'd like to thank Adriana Maldonado Lopez, MEP, for starting these discussions on a very important and timely topic. Before I go any further, I'd like to talk a little bit about why we have chosen to hold this event. We wanted to use the European SME Week to cover the challenges and opportunities for SMEs during these highly uncertain times. As has been discussed many times, but it's worth reiterating, small and medium-sized businesses are the beating heart of Europe's economy and driving economic growth across the continent. They are essential to every regional economy, and their importance increases as one goes further away from Europe's major cities. They provide the vital opportunities for socio-economic participation and employment across Europe, and often are the fabric that holds many communities together. However, with the prolonging pandemic and the second wave of national lockdowns that we're living through right now, SMEs are in for a long and challenging winter. The OECD statistic is something that I was going to quote as well, but now it has been reinforced, and definitely one that we need to make sure doesn't turn into reality. It is clear that the impact, if this were to happen, on the jobs and the wider economy would be severe if Europe's SMEs are not saved. We believe that digital skills and tools can provide a lifeline in a world that is being changed by COVID-19. But we are currently at risk of a digital divide that sets apart the most resilient, agile, and innovative SMEs from those that are less able to react. More on that later. Today's event will explore and discuss tangible recommendations of how best to close this divide, because it's something that we cannot afford. We want to facilitate an open conversation on this issue to ensure that all European SMEs thrive in a future that is increasingly digital. What then does digitalization deliver for SMEs would be the question that we have. The positive impacts of digitalization for SMEs are wide-ranging and definitely drive better business outcomes across the board. Digital tools provide, first and foremost, improved financial performance by reducing costs of operations and helping SMEs optimize their channels to market, which is their source of revenue. When deployed correctly, they clearly increase productivity, they boost efficiency, and they foster innovation. Most importantly, SMEs are always seeking for new customers, and digital tools enable SMEs access to new customers by expanding their geographical reach beyond their city to the country, from the country to the region, and from the region to the world. Softer benefits soon follow. Agile, digitalized businesses are attractive places to work, are generally more innovative, and therefore attract better talent, especially those with higher digital skills, which will be important in the future. Even before COVID-19, digital transformation was important. But the past few months have made it absolutely vital that companies have digital skills. Let me give you an example of an SME in Spain that used digitalization to manage the impact of the pandemic on their practice. Corral and Vargas is a family-run dental business with 3 clinics. It was essential for them to find a way to continue running their dental services even remotely during the lockdown. Patients were able to attend virtual appointments and discuss care issues with dentists from the comfort of their home. But this was possible because the firm decided to use new digital technologies that allowed the company to use cloud-based switchboards and remote medicine technologies to keep communication, contact with the patients running smoothly. Confidential data could be transferred securely from location to location without any compromise being made. All of this meant that the clinic could continue giving care to their patients while putting the safety of their employees and patients in the forefront. It's a great example of how digital, cloud-based technologies and other modern evolutions can help a small business keep their business going. Digital tools also mean that businesses can handle volatility and disruption much more effectively. a scenario that we're most likely going to operate in for quite some period of time. Looking more broadly, the pandemic has accelerated the uptake of digital technologies amongst most SMEs. 69% of SMEs have made a technology investment in direct response to the pandemic, and 36% of these SMEs have accelerated their overall digitalization plans. This is according to a Vodafone business research that was done very recently. However, businesses of all sizes, shapes, and the area that we operate in are realizing that effective digital transformation is much more than about simply buying tools and software. Businesses need to be sure and convinced that they're making the most of the technology they implement to realize the true benefits that these technologies deliver. SMEs that have fewer resources compared to large organizations in successfully integrating these technologies that they invest in. The European Commission has found out that only 17% of SMEs have successfully integrated digital technologies compared to nearly 54% in large organizations. This seems to be a particular issue in Europe compared to the rest of the world. The Boston Consulting Group has found that European SMEs in general are less digitally mature than their counterparts in the US and China. And this is important to address given it's a global world and a competitive world. Our research suggests that there are clear reasons for this in Europe. The three reasons are availability, capacity, and capability. When we talk about availability, availability refers to the technologies required for digitalization, namely high-speed connectivity in both urban and rural areas, as well as suitable digital tools and services. Availability challenges often lead to either unstarted or inefficient digital adoptions. The second point of capacity refers to the time and financial resources SMEs need to navigate through digital transformations. This is particularly heightened given the significant constraints and conflicting priorities for these resources that these businesses face, especially in the light of COVID-19. And finally, the capability of SMEs to gauge, to plan, implement, and optimize their digital transformation is vital. Capability can limit the ability or limit the willingness to adopt new technologies. So why are these issues important to Vodafone? Vodafone proudly serves nearly 3.65 million SMEs and SOHO customers in the European Union with their digital journeys. We understand SMEs, their unique needs, and their concerns about embarking on and working through digital projects. As we have discussed, at a time of crisis, many business leaders will be focused on the day-to-day operations. We understand that digital projects may sometimes not be the highest on their agenda, but equally they realize that they're crucial for their successful recovery. The number of tools, services, and concepts and various aspects of digitalization can quite often be a challenge for those who are non-specialists. We are working with SMEs to ensure that they have not only the fit-for-purpose digital tools that they need during this period, but also to give them the advice they need to use these tools effectively. Our digital advisory service, VHub, is available in a number of member states. It provides expert support to SMEs on topics related to digital transformation. From the thousands of SMEs that we have served using VHub since its launch in July, we know that the areas where they need immediate help are the following: remote working, cybersecurity, and digital enablement. All these are crucial to success in today's digitalized business world and cannot be ignored. We are investing further into VHub to ensure that SMEs have all resources available to them as they go through their digital journeys and create more impact through their businesses. We want this support to small businesses, frankly, to define Vodafone in the European Union, and it's something that we're very passionate about. But to truly embed the benefits of digitalization, we need to address the common challenges that SMEs face with integrating technology. Today, we hope to explore together how we can address these challenges through the EU reconstruction plan. We firmly believe that SMEs are the beating heart of the European economy, and as a business, Vodafone is committed to providing further help to this sector. We see today's event as an important opportunity to discuss this topic with policymakers and key industry stakeholders. Together, we can shape the emerging recommendations to address how European Recovery Fund can support SMEs and the vital role that digital can play in the restructuring. We hope that this discussion will prove to be helpful as member states begin formulating and submitting their national priorities to the EU. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Vinod Kumar, very much for your thoughts. Just while I have you, I'm going to remind people out there of the hashtag if they wish to comment on Twitter, Vinod. The hashtag is EEPA_EU and hashtag SME Digital Recovery. Vinod, thank you very much for your time. And we're going to talk more about that report on SME digitalization that we told you about, commissioned by Vodafone and carried out by Deloitte. Socrates Mokas is from Deloitte and will give us some of the things in the SME report, some of the statistics in it. A word of warning, Socrates was in the special forces, so if you do anything to annoy him, he will abseil down your building in his high vis, low vis clothes and break into your home silently. Socrates, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm wondering how do you find this out? Thank you very much, and first of all, let me thank you for inviting Deloitte to speak in such an important meeting. As just discussed, I'm Socrates Mokas. I'm a director within the Economic Advisory. The reason I am here with you today, guys, is because I led a project for Vodafone where we looked into the digitization of SMEs and how this can actually help especially in the context of COVID-19. Let me just address first a point about why do we care about SMEs. So SMEs are the majority of the employment in European Union. And especially, I would want to raise another issue is that SMEs are very diverse and inclusive in who they employ, and they bring quite a lot of, I would say, a broad range of products that are go beyond what the bigger companies bring sometimes. So how did we do the analysis? We actually used a survey data that was provided by Vodafone that looked into SMEs in Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK. The analysis looked into, first of all, the impact of digitization on SME outcomes within COVID-19. And we were at the point of still significant lockdowns at that point. We wanted to look at the gap of digitization, the digitization gap that SMEs are experiencing. What are the key challenges for SME digitization? And then last but not least, I would say the key purpose was to actually identify what would be a framework for digital policy going forward to support SME digitization, given the benefits that it can have. So let me just talk about a little bit, although I don't want to bore you too much, about the effects of COVID-19 on SMEs. First of all, we identified that a lot of the SMEs were, as you would expect, experiencing a fall in demand. I think something like 36% of SMEs were saying that they were significantly below the demand levels that were the year before. They also experienced supply chain disruptions. That was, even if they had demand, if they were experiencing normal demand conditions, they were not as able as before to actually serve that kind of demand. Finally, and very important from the human element of all of this, is that SMEs were struggling to make ends meet in terms of time. They had to be employees and also work at home, and when during lockdowns, they were trying to balance between the two, and that was something really hard for them. So all SMEs in general, they are facing challenges. And having said that, what we found is that the SMEs that were most digitized were actually seeing more opportunities than those that were not digitized at approximately double the rate. Now, that's not surprising, I guess, even within COVID-19, primarily because we've seen in the past that digitization is found to provide significant benefits. For example, businesses can optimize their revenue opportunities, they can improve their productivity, they can increase their geographical reach, and they have much greater access to information. Now, there are some key quick wins, I would say, when it comes to digitization. For example, businesses were able to put up e-commerce, contactless payments, and therefore reduce the human element from some of the processes. They are also able to automate some of their processes, again, by removing the human contact from it. Now, I would say, though, that more importantly, one would need to think, okay, digitization is great. Why are they not doing it? Why aren't SMEs not doing it? And actually, this is where the digital divide comes into play. There are three key reasons why the digital divide is there. First of all, availability. Connectivity is a very particular issue still prevalent today, which means that there are places in Europe that SMEs do not have access to high-speed connectivity. For example, the gap between urban and rural. As well, that then leads to adoption gaps. So businesses in rural areas are not able to adopt the more advanced digital tools. Secondarily, it's something about capacity. SMEs are not known for having big balances and lending facilities from banks and so on and so forth. Therefore, they have significant financial constraints, and hence, even if they have tools available to them, they may not be able to adopt them because of financial or even time constraints, because they are doing quite a lot of things at their daily routines. Finally, I would say there is a third point, which is capability. So, assuming that they have the availability of tools and that they have the financial capacity, digital skills at times are not there for SMEs because they come from maybe backgrounds where they haven't been trained, the employees or even the managers, and therefore they cannot actually adopt digital tools and therefore use them as well effectively within their businesses and operations. So given this, we thought of going one step further then and discuss, okay, how do we bring a policy? How does Europe bring a policy framework that can consider the challenges so that it actually brings SMEs higher up, closes the digital gap. So what you see here is, first of all, let me explain a couple of points about the graph. So the graph really shows the countries, some of the European countries, in a map that shows what is their accessibility, what is SMB's access to digital tools, and then what is the digital gap. So the size of the bubble indicates a gap between large and small firms. So Greece, for example, has a large bubble. That means that the digital gap in Greece is bigger than other countries, with the Netherlands at the bottom right being the best. And then, of course, the more you are to the left, then the less the access you actually have. So how do we address the digital gap for SMEs so that then European recovery is more inclusive and broader? First of all, we need to address, as Europe needs to address the access to high-speed connectivity, as we said. This is, I would say, a hygiene factor. It becomes a hygiene factor in the sense that businesses need to have that availability of high-speed connectivity, so that then they go and adopt some of the tools that will make their process more efficient. Secondarily, there needs to be a closing of the digital divide and connectivity between larger and small firms. I said earlier that businesses do not necessarily adopt digital tools. So even if there is connectivity, then we need to help SMEs as Europe. We need to help SMEs actually adopting this higher connectivity. I would want to say that in the short term, one way to do that is to provide SMEs with the I would say financial tools to actually be able to adopt the higher connectivity. I would want then to go next and say that, as we said, SMEs do not at times have the digital skills to actually use and to use the digital tools, and therefore we will need to provide them with the guidance in order to understand where is value in terms of digital tools for their business models, and then how to better use these tools once they have adopted them. That is actually training SMEs, understanding where is value, and then also understanding how to better integrate them into their business models. That will actually drive the efficiency in their business model and will make them more resilient. And indeed, at the end of the day, it will contribute to EU's overall recovery and transform. I would say this is probably the most important. Transform Europe to becoming a more dynamic economy for the longer term. So I would like then to leave it here and say it's about access, connectivity, and then flexible and guidance for businesses in order to adopt the digital tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Very interesting about the cost of credit for SMEs being a barrier to kind of investing in the digital future. We have been getting quite a few questions, thank goodness. People have been using the chat function on the bottom right of your screen to post your questions. We will be putting some of those questions to the panel, maybe even to the fireside chat. I might even put one to our next contributor. So let's get the perspective from SMEs themselves and how they have been affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And believe you me, SMEs have been almost worst of all types of businesses. Representing the SMEs in Europe, Albin Magyar is the president of SME United. Albin, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, I'm the chair of SME United that gathers crafts and SMEs all over Europe, and we speak on behalf of 25 million SMEs, represented 100 million workers, employees. So I'm happy to join you today and share with you the views of SME United on how digitalization can strengthen SME resilience. That digitalization is key for future growth, as mentioned in your study, became very clear in the past month. The process of digitalization tremendously accelerated by the pandemic. Entrepreneurs were confronted with limited face-to-face interaction and had to boost online presence and e-commerce practices. And we are in the midst of a digital revolution, and its scope is as impactful as other revolutions that have marked history. Being French, I know what it means. And digitalization is showing that society is rapidly changing. A new way of communication and doing business is materializing as a consequence of technological development and the use of digital tools. And this transformation brings opportunities and challenges, which are the two sides of the same coin. Digital transition must be seen and used in a way that builds on its benefits while limiting negative consequences. Data, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, Internet of Things are becoming economic assets, including for SMEs. Our SMEs are hit severely by the crisis and struggle with liquidity issues and limited resources that endanger their ability to survive. Systemic crisis needs systemic response, and it is key that support is delivered to SMEs in a timely and simple way. It is crucial to have in place all the necessary conditions for SMEs to benefit from the digitalization process. In this way, they can bring innovative products and services on the market. The major obstacles to SMEs' digitalization, according to our surveys, is their limited ability to recognize their digital needs, and on the other hand, make the right investments in digital solutions. Socrates said a few words about that, or many. And this is why member states and the European Commission should facilitate and create the conditions necessary for SMEs to tackle the twin transition and to grow their business in the single market. The well-functioning and integrity of the European single market is essential to create conditions for a fair competition, also in the digital single market, towards bigger players and international competitors. Digitalization needs to address all enterprises. As your study mentions, SMEs require different supports measures according to their level of digitalization, size, and sector. Moreover, SMEs can be users as well as developers and providers of digital services. Facilitating instruments should be targeted to the actual needs of SMEs, keeping in mind companies in the service sector as well as those of the industrial sector. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. No one-size-fits-all solution. Now then, which enables can we put forward and which barriers must we tackle? And I would like to take you through 3 levels. First, awareness raising. Second, a facilitating environment. Third, an appropriate legal framework that would be Digital Services Act, data policy, artificial intelligence. Well, first of all, SMEs should be aware of the opportunities offered by digitalization and the support available for them. As mentioned, many SMEs made a giant leap this past month, taking their business online. SME United asked authorities to cooperate with SME organizations to inform entrepreneurs about measures available at the European and national level. For instance, digital hubs and clusters could team up with SME organizations to provide specific know-how. We support cluster schemes that facilitate SMEs from specific sectors to come together with digital providers, innovation and research centers, and professional organizations to develop innovative digital solutions. Secondly, we should create a facilitating environment. This includes providing the required infrastructure, such as broadband. Training of entrepreneurs and staff in digital technology is another prerequisite. Financial incentives will suddenly now be key to contribute to the digital transformation of SMEs. And this could include several schemes such as a channeled support for the investment in hardware and adequate software, a voucher for a diagnostic exercise by qualified consultants to identify the digitalization needs of SMEs and help them prepare an action plan to expand their online business, or a financial incentive for assistance to address cybersecurity issues. Thirdly, SMEs must be able to work in an appropriate regulatory framework. On this point, a lot of work is on its way with the Digital Services Act, the data policy, and the rules on artificial intelligence. First, as you know, the Commission is developing a Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act. The digital single market requires strengthening the rules in terms of competition and innovation. Moreover, more efforts are needed to improve SMEs' participation in the digital trade in the single market and beyond. This can be achieved in part by modernizing and harmonizing the rules that underpin the digital single market. And for this reason, we support the Commission initiative to propose the Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act. The revision of the e-commerce rules is necessary to adapt to the changing circumstances. SME United believes it is positive to develop a new and flexible ex-ante regulatory framework for large online platforms acting as gatekeepers. Unfair trading practices by these gatekeepers platforms, among others taking over competitors and acquiring startups, should be addressed and, I would say, prohibited. In a second work stream, Commission is working on data policy, and in the digital economy, data is a precondition to compete. Whoever has access to data has a competitive advantage to innovate and bring new products and services onto the market. For the daily activities of SMEs, access to data often means the ability to continue their business. Access to data is an issue for SMEs from all sectors. SME United calls for a fair data economy, which takes into account SMEs' interest as manufacturers and service providers. A European data policy should provide the foundations for the fair access and use of data across different sectors in the EU. Situations where platforms have exclusivity to analyze and use the data should be avoided. Otherwise, this would entail a competitive advantage over those using the platform as a procurement, communication, and sales channel. The owner of the device or customer of the service should be empowered to make a decision on who has access to his/her device data or with whom his or her data as customer is shared. In addition, European standardization activities should boost interoperability and portability. This must ensure the readability and thus usability of the respective data by means of relevant data analysis tools. A European data policy should provide the foundation for the access and use of data across different sectors. Finally, and this is the third point of my third point, new rules are designed on artificial intelligence. AI has the potential to create new opportunities for businesses and the economy, bringing innovative solutions in the single market. SME United supports the Commission's intention to build an ecosystem of trust and excellence by setting the right conditions, especially for SMEs, to access and use AI. We support initiatives aimed at enhancing the cooperation in research, technological development, and innovation, and to strengthen the SMEs' capacity in the field of AI. So, Together, we have gone through 3 levels: awareness raising, a facilitating environment, and an appropriate legal framework. To conclude, I would say that much still has to be done. However, in the meanwhile, each and every day, SMEs are working hard to adapt and become more resilient. Thank you.
Merci, Albin. Thank you much for your presentation. While I have you, and since you're representing so many millions of SMEs, can I put a question to you that we've got from some audience who's put this question? His name is Jakob, and his says, could you sum up which would be the SMEs' desiderata or their wish list towards national RRF plans, and which modalities for distributing the fund would be more suitable from an SME point of view? So what's your wish list and how would you like to get?
Yeah, as politician would put it, that's an excellent question. I would say that we are, first of all, everybody knows we are facing the economical consequences of a sanitary crisis. So we don't know what future is going to be. But if we want to be resilient, we know that we have to adapt ourselves to digitalization and to be good at that. And so in our wish list, there's something that perhaps hasn't been said enough in my presentation. It is that we need skills. Of course, we need money, we need advice, we need things like that, but we need people that have the skills in our SMEs. And it means having new skills and upscaling the skills we have in SMEs, starting with the entrepreneur himself. In many instances, there is a kind of, I would say, generation gap, because many entrepreneurs are 40, 50 or over. So they need a total change of mindset. So it means really training, and I would say vocational training. That would be the first thing to do, because they have to be aware of what is going on and of their needs. And as I mentioned, I mean, in many cases, they need a helping hand to go through their own needs and see what could be the hierarchy of those needs and how they have got to start. So it would be skills, and then money, that is to say funds, really quickly available funds, and then, of course, adapting their business model to those two things.
Thank you very much. Merci, Albin. We're going to go to our very special fireside chat now. We have not one, but 2 Irishmen, and the moderator is also an Irishman. So you can see the theme here as well here. Just to remind you of the hashtags, if you want to comment on Twitter or LinkedIn, it is EEPA_EU or hashtag SME Digital Recovery. So I'm going to read out 1 or 2 more questions while I have you, before we bring up Liam and Jared, I hope they're standing by. A question from Dan Solke. How can organizations and governmental bodies how have they been working or investing in organizations like CICs and social enterprises focused on SME recovery through digital? Do you plan to do more? And if, what's the best way for these organizations to get in touch? Interesting question there from Dan, which we hopefully will discuss in the course of today. Please welcome to the hearth, the fireside hearth, Liam O'Brien, the Director of Strategy and External Affairs of Vodafone Ireland. Liam is responsible for Vodafone's engagement with key stakeholders such as media, regulators, Government of Ireland, as well as corporate security, privacy, wholesale, legal affairs, and the Vodafone Charity Foundation. Liam, I'm surprised you have time to even wash your hair these days. Good job. Jared Brady is the Chief Economist at the Irish Business and Employers Confederation, or IBEC. And apart from being the voice of Irish business, Gerard is a board member on the National Statistics Board, and he used to lecture in University College Cork. I'm going to hand over to you, gents, for your little chat. Liam, I believe you have a few questions for Gerard.
That's right, Joe. And good morning, everybody. And as three Irish people here, we will do our best to keep this to time, because as you know, we do have a reputation for being able to talk. So listen, good morning, Gerard. Let's get straight into it then. Listen, from my undergraduate days in university, I recall that Ireland, as a small open economy, is particularly vulnerable to external shocks. Now, given the double impact this year of COVID-19 and, of course, Brexit, I expect 2020 is a year that will go down in history that will be hard to surpass in terms of its impact on Irish business. So you might start, Gerard, by just giving us an overview of the importance of the SME sector to the Irish economy as a whole, and maybe then how representative is that of maybe comparison countries and other member states in Europe?
Yeah, thanks, Liam, and thanks for having me this morning. I think if you look at Ireland, the SME community is incredibly important, and no more so. We've seen that through COVID over recent months, the importance of that as the lifeblood of our communities from a point of view of small firms, both on the high street and as employers. And as well, we look at it from the economic point of view. Ireland, about 70% of the private sector is employed in an SME, compared to a little less, about 2/3 across the EU as a whole. So in a small country that is peripheral, I suppose, in a geographic sense, and that has a higher amount of people living throughout the country in regional and rural areas, the role of SMEs is crucially important, both from an economic point of view in terms of providing employment, but also we see it from a social point of view in terms of being the social outlet, being the providers of entertainment, the providers of experiences throughout the kind of societies that we live in and the communities that we live in throughout the country.
Thanks, Gerard. I think that social aspect of it is very important. And you mentioned as well, just in terms of how Ireland compares to other EU jurisdictions as well. Are we comparable in terms of other member states?
Yeah, I think broadly across Europe, SMEs are important everywhere. I think if you look at Ireland, there's reasons that SMEs might be more important here than in other places. The first I briefly touched on was this idea that probably more people were less urbanized as a country. More people live in smaller communities spread out throughout the country, and SMEs in those communities are often the sole provider of jobs and of opportunity for people. So they're crucially important. We also see, I suppose, challenges for SMEs in Ireland compared to other countries. So one of the reasons is we have a smaller domestic market. SMEs in general across Europe tend to be slower to internationalize, to export. That is true for Irish SMEs as well. And when you have a smaller domestic market, that's a big challenge. And the other part of that is that SMEs in Ireland probably face, along with COVID, are more exposed to one of the other big events that we see coming down the line in the coming months in terms of Brexit. So that SME community in Ireland is both incredibly important as it is across Europe, but also very challenged over the next coming months. And we're going to really see the resilience and the importance of resilience for that community play out over the next 3-4 months.
So listen, I think building on that, Irish SMEs and Irish business had been in the middle of preparing for Brexit when COVID struck. Maybe you could just tell us, in your view, how have Irish SMEs responded to the COVID crisis? And has that shone a light in any way on the particular strengths or gaps in terms of SME resilience?
We've seen kind of two phases. We had a first lockdown from the end of March through until the end of the summer, and then we're in a second lockdown, and hopefully we'll be able to come out of it soon now. And what we've seen is a big difference between those two phases. In the first lockdown, I think, firstly, the big challenge to the resilience of most SMEs was this problem of cash flow, the liquidity and the ability to get money in the door when they still had outgoings happening. They still had to pay their rent, they still had to pay insurance and all the rest. We've seen the government play a big role in stepping in there and helping, particularly on the labour cost side over the recent months. But what we've also seen is across SMEs, and I suppose when we talk about SMEs, there's services businesses, manufacturing businesses, there's businesses across various multiple subsectors. But if you look at the worst impacted on the consumer side, we've seen a lot of resilience in terms of companies which have maybe struggled in the first wave to find ways to still trade. A lot in retail, for example, have come online, have introduced click and collect, have introduced new methods of trying to reach customers despite the lockdown that they're under. We've seen the same in restaurants, for example, and in the hospitality business. It doesn't apply to everyone. Not everyone's business model works for it, but we've seen growing and improving resilience, I think, over the course of it, even as there has been significant draws on cash flow and pressures on those businesses.
No, it's really interesting to hear. It just does show the importance of being able to adapt quickly and the power of digitalization. Listen, I know from the recent OECD report on SME and entrepreneurship policy in Ireland, they make the point that in comparison to other EU member states, Ireland has a particularly low rate of business startups. And it seems that there's a big regional divide as well that is concentrated in the two big cities. And actually, there's a big discrepancy outside of Dublin and Cork, which seems to point to some underlying issues in terms of supports for that ecosystem in business in general outside of the big cities. Now, for several years, we in Vodafone, through a joint venture with the electricity company, we have been bringing fibre to the home to rural Ireland, and we've supported the creation of digital co-working hubs around rural Ireland, helping not only to bring workers back to those communities, but also to act as a catalyst for business startup. And the one thing that definitely COVID has shown us, and we're living proof of it today, is that work is no longer tied to a physical location. So I think there's really definitely an opportunity to these regional gaps. Now, you might comment on your view from the point of view of IBEC. What are the opportunities for SMEs in regional Ireland? Do co-working hubs play a part of that? And what else is required maybe to support businesses in regional Ireland?
I think if you look across Europe, there's a lot of countries that are quite similar to Ireland in terms of being small countries, in terms of the size of the domestic market, but there's also big differences. Ireland, for example, and just for context, is probably still one of the least urbanized countries, particularly in Western Europe, apart from maybe Portugal and some other countries with similar demographics. But you see a lot more people living in smaller communities, in regional and rural areas, that basically SMEs become the main lifeblood of that community and are both on a social and on an economic side hugely important. What we've seen over recent years is big challenges. So the more and more society urbanizes, the more that opportunity moves towards cities, the more challenging it's been for people in those communities. And that is not just here, but across the world. And it's led to lots of challenges from a political point of view across the OECD. But, at home here as well, we face those same challenges. I think COVID, we've seen some shift. What we have seen is a massive growth in online and remote working has got a lot of attention. There's big opportunity for that. And we've done research recently that showed we think about a third of Irish workers could work remotely at least some of the time. At the moment, that number is down around 15%. So you see significant opportunity there for regional and rural Ireland. From the remote working point of view, the big challenge, I suppose, is two things, is the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, in terms of broadband, in terms of that remote working space and hubs to facilitate people. And the second is kind of the soft infrastructure within companies and within businesses. And we talk to our members about this all the time, the challenges around how you manage people when they're working remotely, how you support them, how you make sure that productivity doesn't get damaged by remote working. And I think the experience of a lot of companies who might have been worried about those things has been really positive during COVID. Productivity stayed up. The infrastructure has held up for the most part. And hopefully I don't jinx us now. But we've seen a huge amount of positives come out of that. And I think a lot of our members are going to move towards this hybrid remote working model in the long term. Within Europe, trying to find across countries the best way of doing that. How do you mix different companies into remote work spaces? How do you get people maybe out of their houses into the center of their local community to revitalize town centers? There's massive opportunities there. The bigger challenges as well on the other side is the skills challenge that that a lot of regional and rural areas face. There is a massive gap in digital knowledge and digital skills between urban and rural areas and regional areas. The remote work piece might bridge some of that gap, but there is generational issues, there are skills issues across the board, and people with digital skills tend to move towards more urban areas. Bridging that gap over the coming years and increasing digital skills in those rural areas is the only way, even with hard infrastructure and that investment, increasing those digital skills across the board is the only way that those regional and rural areas will be able to take advantage of the changes that are coming because of digitization, both of SMEs, but also of life in general and public services and social services and everything else that comes down the line. So that is crucially important. So we see that hard and soft infrastructure together being key, and one doesn't work without the other from a regional and a rural point of view.
Thanks, Ger. Some really, I think, interesting insights there from what you're seeing from your members in rural Ireland. Listen, maybe now looking into the future a bit more, I think often every crisis can also act as a catalyst for change. And not just for individual companies, but for an economy as a whole. And it definitely there's a real sense that COVID-19, can be and will be a catalyst for Ireland and for Europe to build back better. Now, I know there's a long-standing and maybe potentially correlated series of challenges that have faced SMEs in Ireland, things like struggling and stagnant productivity, underinvestment in R&D, and very, very low levels of international trade. Maybe thinking about the national and the EU recovery program, and we've heard some of the earlier speakers, about talking about digital adoption. It's clear that digital adoption can be part of that enabler for SMEs. But what else is important, do you think, as well for SMEs beyond the technology itself?
Beyond the technology itself, I think that issue of skills is going to be hugely important. What we've seen, the biggest challenge for our members in the take-up of digital technology, well, firstly, there's probably three challenges. One is funding, is getting the money in place, particularly in the context of COVID. People's balance sheets are going to be damaged by COVID. Finding the resources now to commit towards digitization and the willingness to take that risk is going to be very important. Government has a huge role to play there, as does the European Commission and the EU as a whole. The second challenge, and probably a bigger challenge in a lot of ways, is a lot of SME owners, like a lot of people in society in general, don't have necessarily the digital skills to understand what technology they need. And it comes down to the simple phrase, they don't know what they don't know. And you can't see the advantages of digital technologies if you don't understand them in the first place. So there's a big education piece there. And the other challenge that we see in a lot of members that we work with members on all the time is this idea of trying to integrate digital. So it's not just about having access to the physical infrastructure or the digital infrastructure, or having the education to know what digital infrastructure you need. It is the managerial ability to work those digital technologies into the everyday working and to get the most out of them in terms of the productivity benefit they can bring. And I think those three challenges together will see huge focus from governments and from Europe over the coming years. I think the big challenge from our point of view is, how do you do that best? And we see the opportunity, I suppose, in the European context is all countries are going to be moving towards this same goal, but to try and share the experiences of what works best is going to be a major challenge. And from a small country point of view, and as I said, the majority of European countries are small, have small domestic markets. The uptake of that digital, not just from a consumer sales point of view, but also from a business to business point of view, more and more deals done through those digital channels. Uptake of digital technology and the ability to integrate digital technology is going to be highly correlated with the ability of SMEs to internationalize, to export and to trade into bigger markets and eventually grow, particularly for companies in small markets like our own, and particularly in services companies and goods companies where market peripherality is a challenge.
Listen, thanks, Jared. Maybe just one final quick question. I think you've touched upon some of it there, but I know when we spoke previously, talking about that challenge facing Irish SMEs to expand beyond Ireland into Europe, about some of the other maybe challenges that face them at the European level in terms of the single market. You might just quickly touch upon that.
Yeah, I think we see three things that Europe can do that will help SMEs. Firstly, the the prioritization of digitization in terms of European funding has been really welcome. Not necessarily just because of funding itself, but because it sets the priorities for national governments, and it influences national governments in terms of the way that they spend money and what they prioritize and how they do it through the European semester and just generally. We also see a big opportunity in terms of sharing experience across economies and improving the sharing of information between national governments and between business organizations on what works and what doesn't. So, for example, we've seen during COVID, the schemes with the biggest take-up from companies have been, and the quickest take-up have been actually some of the online retail schemes that the government has introduced here to try and get small firms to set up a marketplace to try and get e-commerce integrated into their systems and to get online. And then the third thing, and probably significantly important, and one of those things that it's never going to be, the front page of newspapers, but that continued integration of the single market, particularly on the goods side, but also significantly growingly on the services side, not just to do with digital technology and the uptake of digital technology, but across the single market, standardization of standards, of labeling, of packaging, things like returns policies, all of those kind of areas are all brought together. And even things like, and it was mentioned by a previous speaker, the cost of investing across Europe. There's big divergences. Bringing that closer together through capital markets union, through banking and closer banking ties can help to reduce costs, to reduce the challenges and the barriers to businesses trading across jurisdictions. And eventually it will lead to stronger, more export-orientated SMEs and a better economy on the back of it.
Listen, Ger, I think we'll have to leave it there. That's been fantastic. Thank you for all your insights and input. I think that really gives us a sense of what's happening in an economy in Ireland and how Irish SMEs are responding. So back over to you, Joe.
Thank you. From two Irishmen to one Irishman. Thank you very much to Jerry Brady and to Liam O'Brien from Vodafone Ireland for your insights. Before we come to Ireland, I'd like to play you a very short video from a well-known Italian women's sportswear brand called Deha, which shows how they continue to thrive during lockdown, thanks in part to having a stable cloud services with Vodafone. Short video, so please don't go anywhere. Keep your questions coming in for the main panel, which is coming up shortly. That video now.
They always say that behind a problem, there might be an opportunity. And this is what happened to us. In Italy, we are the only company that produces a sportswear collection for women. Media started to talk a lot about coronavirus in February.
Italy is seeing the worst outbreak outside of Asia.
At the beginning, everything went down, but we never stopped. We focus on our e-commerce, and we had an amazing growth of sales. It was extremely important to exchange data. Having a stable cloud like the one of Vodafone was absolutely essential. This period gave me the opportunity to get close with my colleagues, and the atmosphere, the feeling between us has really improved. If we were a team before, we are today a family. It feels to me today incredible that we have found our way. What is normal might be not normal anymore. So it is important to be open to opportunities and challenges.
Thank you very much. Grazie mille to Deha there for putting that video together. Finally, we come to our main panel discussion. It's called The Role of SMEs Digitalization for European Recovery and Overall Competitiveness. Hopefully, it will highlight the importance of digitalization for SMEs in order to aid European recovery from COVID-19 and overall competitiveness. It will also discuss what the EU is doing to help small businesses and the forthcoming post-COVID-19 EU Recovery Fund worth 750 billion euros. We will hopefully be tackling 4 questions on this panel. What are the enablers and to SME digital? What are the best practices across the EU helping SMEs to SMEs, and how can national recovery plans support SMEs? If you want those, there they are. They're up on screen there. If you want to find out more, it's on the website that you're watching this webcast on. If you click the 3 little lines on the left-hand side, hopefully you'll be able to get more information on our panelists. Firstly, let me introduce our panel. Devin Bicher is with in Commission. Commission will be launching the Recovery Fund, known officially Next Generation EU, as well as the normal MFF, which could be worth over $500 billion over the next 7 years. DG Grow runs the SME Assembly as part of the SME, which has just come to a close. Celine Kaufmann, head of SME and Entrepreneurship Division at the OECD, representing 37 of the most advanced countries in the world. The OECD only yesterday published its own SME financing scoreboard and its global initiative called Digital for SMEs. Hello, Celine. Katja Stakaki is Business Unit Director at Vodafone, Greece. She will share with us what it was like for Greek SMEs during the decade-long economic crisis before this latest COVID-19 crisis. She'll talk about how technology can future-proof small firms. Manju George is the head of platform strategy, digital economy, and new value creation at the World Economic Forum. The WEF, and we all know their annual meeting in Davos every January, facilitates public-private partnerships such as the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation that aim to improve digitalization of SMEs and the supply chains that they operate in. She'll be talking about how few small companies are digitalized and the role of advancing digital. And finally, Sebastiano Toffaletti is the Secretary General of the European Digital SME Alliance, which represents 20,000 SMEs in Europe. Sebastiano believes that COVID-19 accelerate the transition for small business to the 4th industrial revolution. Hoping you could all hear me. I know we've had 1 or 2 technical issues. Can't hear me? Give me a wave. Hello. Can you hear me? You have. There. Wave. Great, great, great. I'm going to start with Devin Bicher from DG Grow in the European Commission. Devin, can I start with you? The EC President, Ursula von der Leyen, has stated that SMEs are the motor of our economy and will be the engine of our recovery. Can you provide an overview of how the Commission aims to ensure SME recovery and resilience from COVID-19 through the EU Recovery Fund? And apologies for technical glitches we've had over the last few minutes on my side. Devin.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting this important event and for having me speak here. I'm sure no one brought this up yet, so I'm pretty sure you're not on a Vodafone network. So coming back to your question, the research has shown so far that from a policy perspective, a crisis is responded to in 3 stages. And with that analogy, I would like to take you through the Commission's response to the crisis since the onset in March. First, it has started with liquidity, addressing the liquidity problems. And I would like to cite two examples here. One was the increasement of the COSME loan guarantee facility by over 700 million euros to provide SMEs with the working capital they need. And what was also launched was Escalar, which is essentially an equity investment facility for high-tech startups. So those are just two examples which have been published and addressed by the Commission since March. Now coming a little bit to the second stage is the medium-term recovery support, which has been the case with the SME strategy. Even though it was adopted on 10th of March, just before COVID hit the EU with full force, its elements are more important than ever today to ensure that Europe recovery can go ahead at full speed. So the priorities of the strategy are also the priorities of the recovery period, and it addresses the challenges SMEs face. Those are access to finance, reducing red tape, and building capacity for this twin transition, which we've already mentioned quite often, that is towards digitalization and sustainability. And a third element has emerged in terms of the crisis, that is to increase resilience for enterprises. And to make this a little bit more tangible, I would like to state two examples which are done on the ground for SMEs in order to cope better with the strategy, to cope better with the crisis. And those two examples are taken from the SME strategy itself. One of them would be the Digital Volunteers Program, which is a platform where basically more experienced staff members of high-tech companies work together with, let's say, not as much or not as well-equipped or not as well-skilled staff members from SMEs, and they work together in areas, for example, blockchain or AI, and that pilot program will start with the beginning of next year, sorry. So at the beginning of 21. And the Enterprise Europe network, being the biggest support network for businesses globally, is here to support businesses in every member state on the transition to digitalization, but as well to sustainability. So the EN will now be equipped with so-called sustainability advisors to help SMEs face both challenges, that is the digitalization and the sustainability aspect. And these were just two examples to illustrate that there are already numerous actions underway to set SMEs on track for the recovery, and what the European Commission does in those aspects. Can you still hear me, Joe?
Devin.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I've lost Devin.
I'm still
yes,
here.
I can just about hear you. Were you wrapping up there?
Yes, I was. What was the last? Where did you stop hearing me?
Okay. Stay with us, Devin. I'm going to move on to Celine Kaufmann from the OECD.
Sure, Joe. Do you
bear with me, Devin. We'll move on to Celine Kaufmann from the OECD and come back to you, if I may, Devin. Celine, can you hear me?
Very well. Very happy to be here.
Yes, I do. And the OECD has launched a Digital for SME Global Initiative, D4SME. Can you share the key themes that is emerging on that?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. With pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. Let me just give you a couple of words of
Celine,
context.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. And I'll start by giving you a bit of context on the Digital for SME initiative of the OECD. It was actually born out of a call from OECD governments a couple of years back to strengthen the dialogue and inform policies to remove obstacles to SME digitalization. And so consequently to that call, the OECD brought together governments, large businesses, but also SMEs themselves to better understand the obstacles that the different populations of SMEs face when it comes to digitalization, but also how governments can help and the role of large companies in their various engagements with small firms. So why is it important? It's important because we know that many SMEs lag behind the digital transition. And the OECD has been mentioned a couple of times today already for the numbers that we put together. So let me give you a number to illustrate that fact. Back in 2019, through our work on ICT usage in businesses, we realized that in 2019, SMEs were only half as likely as large firms to be using e-commerce or cloud computing. So there's a big gap between SMEs and big companies. So given this trend, and to answer your question more precisely, we see four themes emerging in the discussion among the stakeholders that are part of this Digital for SME initiative. And they will be the topics of the high-level roundtable that we're hosting in February 2021. And you'll see the four topics resound very well with some of the discussions that we had this morning. The first one is about online presence and e-commerce. The second one is about teleworking. The third one is about access to digital infrastructure. And the last one that we heard a bit less this morning is about digital security. So let me tell you a couple of words on each. On online presence and e-commerce, before the pandemic, roughly half of small firms engage with social media. And that compares with more or less 3/4 of large firms. So we do have a gap there. And more or less 3/4 of small firms had a website compared to 95% of big companies. We know that the pandemic actually increased and forced SMEs to increase their digital presence, to be able to sell their products, to be closer to their clients, to ensure customer services as well. But we still see that this online presence presents SMEs with many challenges. We heard about the lack of awareness, skills, managerial vision, and financial resources to move their business online. So that's to us a key theme. The second one, teleworking. We've seen with the crisis, obviously, that allowing workers to work from home has become a necessity to face, the restrictions. However, compared to big companies, SMEs are less well prepared to that transition. And there's a couple of factors that drive that. There's an issue with culture mentality. There's some issues with the business practices and the tools and the organization of the tasks so that staff can work from home. Access to digital infrastructure, the third theme. We know that access to affordable and high quality communication networks and services for data transmission is really key for the digital transition of SMEs. However, we know SMEs might be really very embedded into their territories. And we heard about the gap between the rural and the urban areas earlier in the discussion. And we know that it affects strongly SMEs that might have low speed connection, although this morning is a good example that we can have low connection everywhere. But I wanted to mention a key topic which is related to the infrastructure, which is the digital security. The successful transition to a digital economy obviously hinges on security and trust in the IT infrastructure and services. And this is an area where the system is only as strong as its weakest link. However, we know that the digital transformation has drastically increased SME exposure and vulnerability to digital risks. And this is in part due to their weaknesses in risk management practices. And just a last number on that, we know that less than 1/3 of small firms carry out digital security risk assessments. And that compares to more than 3/4 of large firms. And as long as security is not addressed at the level of small firms, it's going to jeopardize the system as a whole, and it's going to jeopardize and to to expose entire value chains. So I'll stop here. 4 themes for us, and they really cut across what we heard this morning.
Merci, Céline. Thank you so much. Just to let our audience know, obviously we're patching through a lot of lines all into one central point. So there's a slight delay on the line, which might be a little bit odd for some people, but it's the world we live in post-COVID, where we're patching everybody in. Ideally, we would have been all in one nice place and sitting together on a sofa. I'm going to move now to another lovely place, Katia Stakati, who is head of Vodafone Greece Business Unit Director. How are you, Katia? I hope Yasu or Yasis. I'm not sure how to say it exactly. Can I ask you a question about SMEs being at the very fabric of Greek society? And can you paint us a picture of what it's like for small to medium enterprises in the wake of lockdowns and the COVID-19 crisis, and how it's impacted your small companies?
Hi, Joe. Yasu. Thank you very much for this introduction. Indeed, as you're saying, the SME companies are the backbone of the Greek economy, contributing to more than 65% of the value and 90% almost of the overall employment. During the lockdown, wholesale and retail trade, as well as manufacturing, that together generate half of the value added by SME companies, have been greatly affected. And overall, we have seen a huge impact on SMEs in Greece. Additionally, tourism has been hit especially hard, and you have to take into account that the sector supports many small businesses. Usually, most of them are even family businesses. The COVID-19 outbreak is putting SME companies as well as the entire Greek economy at risk. Here we need to understand that prior to the COVID outbreak and the crisis this is bringing in today, Greece, the Greek economy, had suffered 10 years of a financial crisis, possibly the longest ever in a country in peaceful times. And just as the economy was slowly returning to growth, and the SME companies were starting to grow again, the COVID outbreak suddenly overwhelmed these companies, and the impact is really, really huge because they don't have any more fat after many years of struggle. As an immediate step, the Greek government has put policies into place, including tax reliefs and other measures that aim at minimizing job losses and business closures in the medium and short term. And in addition to that, the European Commission approved a 1.2 billion euro scheme, Greek aid scheme, to support the country for the first month and in the context of this outbreak. And this scheme was approved under the state aid temporary framework. It will enable the direct grants to ensure that SMEs will continue to function also in the future and to get through this very, very difficult time. Overall, Greece has undertaken a number of structural changes as well as decentralization and regionalization reforms in the past 10 years. And mostly in the past year, and especially during the COVID crisis, the first lockdown crisis. And now we stand in front of additional development priorities, which have to do with fostering digitalization across, so in the private and in the public sector, improving entrepreneurial and business ecosystems, and addressing also environmental challenges. So in the context that I just gave you, it becomes evident that the only way for the Greek SME companies and businesses to become more resilient and more competitive, especially in the wider EU market as well as the global market at the end of the day, and to be able to act as a motor in the Greek economy, the only path is the path towards digitalization. This is evident and clear so far. Back to you.
Efkaristo, Katja, thank you very much. Now let's move on to Manju George from the World Economic Forum. Manju, I know there's a little delay on the line, so bear with us. Can I just follow on from what Katja was saying very specifically about Greece? The World Economic Forum has a much bigger helicopter view of things. What role do you think that digital plays for SME recovery and resilience?
Thank you, Joe, and very glad to be here. So the crisis really showed how important technology and digital transformation is for small businesses who already had an online presence, who had integrated technology into their everyday sort of work, were able to go online faster. They were able to continue sales. They were able to retain some revenues. And we should also keep in mind that while going online, doing e-commerce is a necessity right now during COVID times, we're also expecting some of these shifts in consumer behavior to stay on beyond the crisis. So it's an investment not just in temporary sort of recovery, but also long-term resilience and sustainability. So that's really important from just retaining business revenues point of view. It's also important to keep in mind that the supply chains are getting disrupted. The crisis really showed how fragile supply chains are. And here again, there is a role for digital to digitize the supplier customer relationships, to make supply chains more agile, to predict better and match demand and supply better. And also supply chains are coming back home or becoming more local. And there again, there will be a role for automation and other technologies. So again, that's another area where digital would be important. Perhaps a third area I'd highlight is the financial pressure that SMEs are in. Often have very short reserves. Sort of working capital is a concern. And even though there are banks and other traditional lenders are trying to get loans available to them. For some of the smaller SMEs, it's always been challenging to find those loans and get them in time because of no collateral, or it gets costly for banks to service them, etc. And here again, I would say for the banks, automation, we've number of banks during the crisis using bots and other technologies to get loans faster, quicker to SMBs. And I'd probably also mention online servicing companies, fintechs and others who are also seeing a lot of growth in their business during the crisis because they're able to use alternative forms of data to assess creditworthiness of SMEs, to assess risk, and to offer them with loans. So again, I think it's shown how important digital is for greater productivity, perhaps also on managing employees and their well-being, empowering them. That's another area where digital has really helped during the crisis. And so if I look at the bigger picture of Europe, there is work to be done in that under 20% of the SMEs are digitized today. So there is work to be done. And the previous conversations showed us the differences and the divides that exist within as well, between countries, between urban, rural. Women-owned businesses are having a particularly tough time because they're also in sectors that where the demand is sort of declining. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the green and digital agenda, the twin transition that Europe has outlined, is a huge opportunity, and SMBs can be at the heart of that.
Manju, thank you very much. I'm going to go to our final panelist now, Sebastiano Toffaletti, who is the Secretary General of European Digital at the SME Alliance. Sebastiano, buongiorno. Quick question for you. SMEs are a central element of the EU Recovery Fund. We spoke about the 750 billion euros. In your view, what investments should be prioritized to ensure that SME recovery is deep and sustainable for future growth?
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for the question, and very nice to be with you. It would be great to be if we were all sitting together in a place and discussing all this, because I think the topic is super interesting and it's very good to be with so many important stakeholders and decision makers, really. So I wish we can do this perhaps after all this lockdown and this crisis. Let me get to your question, Joy. Indeed. My organization represents SMEs, which are the digital ones, those that are at the forefront of the digitalization, the ICT companies, not necessarily the big ones, but really the small and medium-sized enterprises that are the driving force of this digital revolution. We are talking about software companies, technology companies that really transfer technologies to other SMEs. So we really think that these companies are the pacemakers of the digital revolution, because they are those whose business is to be on a daily basis in contact with other SMEs and transfer them the technology. So when we think about the crisis and the recovery fund, the first thing we say is that we need to drive the economy and especially the SMEs to a sustainable digitalization. We need to drive them to become more resilient, more innovative, and more dynamic, because by doing so, not only they will survive this crisis, Joy, but they will be ready for the future. Okay, and here is the big issue. How do we do that? Some people, in my opinion, they are completely wrong. They think digitalization of SMEs equals SMEs going on certain online platforms. Essentially, they think if you become a seller on Amazon, or if you use Google, Facebook, or other platforms, then you are digital and you are done and you are resilient and safe. And unfortunately, I believe this is not the case. I believe this is perhaps a first step, but I believe this is definitely not enough. And for many SMEs, this is even risky, because we have seen how much these platforms nowadays are aggressive when we talk about the use of business data, the use of, how they enter our markets from other companies. And therefore, a sustainable digitalization is something that goes much beyond that. And we believe we are talking about a long-term journey. We are talking about an innovation process. What we want is to make SMEs really become dynamic and really understand what they can do with digital technologies. Digital technologies are, a broad range of topics. We are talking about artificial intelligence. We are talking about big data, IoT, blockchain, cybersecurity, and many more. And there is so much companies can do with it. And when we speak about the digital transformation, this is not just doing what you are doing, but being a bit more efficient because you're using ICT or software. This is step number one. What we are talking about is transforming your own business model and generating value through these technologies. And this is, really a disruptive thing that may take and will take years. And it is an innovation process that will make everyone more sustainable and ready for the future. So when we think about the recovery fund, and there is really, as it was said before, a lot of money which will be put to help companies, especially SMEs, we think this should be the focus. We should focus on the long-term objectives. Yes, indeed, we should give liquidity, and we are the first one to lobby for liquidity for SMEs, because this is problem number one. But we should make sure they make investments, which are investments in innovation, investments in skills, investments in long-term objectives that will really bring them to a sustainable level of digitalization, Joy. So I think I don't wanna take too much of your time. So I'm happy to take more questions if needed.
Grazie, Sebastiano. Grazie mille. Can I go back to Devin Bitcher from DG Grow? Devin, quite a lot of people are looking at the European Commission and what they're doing. We've already heard from some of our panelists that working capital is a major issue, and getting the loans paid on time and paid straight away. I wonder how the European Commission, I know this is not specifically DG Grow's area, but how do they get the money quickly to SMEs as part of the EU Recovery Fund. Devin Bitcher from the European Commission, DG Grow. Can you hear us?
Yes, Joe, thank you. Again, can you hear me well as well? Does the connection work? Yeah. Okay. So as mentioned previously, quite a couple of times, the recovery package with the Next Generation EU provides unprecedented amounts of money to boost the EU's recovery. And this money is essentially dispersed, or the vast majority of it is essentially dispersed to member states, either in loans or grants. So given that also couple of speakers, or numerous speakers actually, have highlighted the importance of SMEs, SMEs need to be at the heart of this recovery and at the heart of each national recovery plan and package that is put forward. Also, the recovery packages and the SME strategy need to go hand in hand, and SMEs must benefit from investments and reforms funded under the Recovery and Resilience Facility. In order to do that, the Commission will provide guidance to member states on the implementation of the country's plans. And one thing I would like to emphasize here as well is it's not only as important investments are, it's also about reforms, especially from the medium to long term. And reforms are equally important under this resilience and recovery plans. So concretely, where could member states prioritize their investments in would be areas such as the acceleration of renewables, improving the energy efficiency of buildings. Those 2 points particularly come in with the Green Deal and with our challenge of climate change. Any investment into sustainability and smart transport, and as was previously mentioned before, also quite often the connectivity issue that is providing broadband is significantly important. But also public administration could and should be more digitalized, and cloud capacities, for example, or processes. Much could be invested there. So those were many points I've mentioned so far are more or less on the hardware side of things. But with that comes also the investments into reskilling and upskilling that entrepreneurs, businesses, and citizens alike have the opportunity to use that fostered infrastructure. So concrete projects which could be prioritized with the national plans would be supporting existing support networks on the national, regional, or local level. For example, the Enterprise Europe network, which I've mentioned earlier, or for example, the European Digital Innovation Hubs, which are going to be rolled out in each member state, which exactly support small to low-tech SMEs, even, let's say, in less developed regions. And their member states can join in their efforts to co-finance those instruments. Then I would like to make one example on a very local level, what can be done as well, and maybe not necessarily only with investments. That is the cross-border pilot, which was issued by the Commission, is a pilot where we ask whether regions, cross-border regions, would like to work together in a long-term partnership to tackle problems of the single market. And that could be, for example, in the area of posting of workers or somewhere else, but would bring together solutions for companies on the ground between member states. So to sum up, maybe reforms could tackle anything from 5G and fiber connectivity to uptake of businesses' digital technologies, promoting cyber resilience, or increasing digital skills. And with that, I would like to give back to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Devin. I'm going to go to Katja Stakati from Vodafone in Greece. Devin mentioned some very interesting stuff, but he also said the money is going to flow, but it comes with strings attached, and those strings are reform. That there should be reform of public administration, reform or improvement of cloud capacity. There should be upskilling of people in SMEs. From a Greek perspective, Katja, is that possible in the short term?
Yes, thank you for the question. This is actually the most important question. So let me get back to the money. The expected financial assistance from the European Union via the Recovery Fund is 32 billion euros for Greece, which is quite big when compared to the country's GDP. And it will fundamentally help the economy, given that it is used in the right way and in the right also timing. But before we discuss on how these funds could be used best and in what way, I think it's important to look at three very, very specific facts. So fact number one, the degree of digitalization and digital skills in the Greek businesses today is far below the EU average. Thus, this goes back to what was said earlier, we need reskilling. Fact number two, the adoption of digital technologies in SMEs in Greece, again today, such as e-commerce, cross-border commerce, use of big data, cloud services and infrastructure, they lag behind the EU average and they do not accumulate for more than 15%. Fact number three, the overall digital transformation in Greece, the performance has been improving and has done so increasingly in the past months. However, it still remains below the EU average. And according to the latest overall digital economy and society index, the DISI, Greece ranked second last in the EU. Thus, there is a lot of a lot of ground to cover, and I would there start with the most important, the first and primarily important sector to look at or part to look at, which is the connectivity. We discussed it earlier, and it was also discussed earlier at the Ireland discussion. However, the connectivity is not a given, and this is the most important thing to be addressed. To overall expand the high-speed internet access, but even in areas where high-speed internet access is available, then the government needs to provide schemes in the form of short-term vouchers to support high-speed connectivity take-up, because the lack of high-speed connectivity is the first barrier to digitalization. The second step then, and beyond supporting the connectivity, would be for the government to provide further direct financial support to enable digital investment and to allow for flexibility for SMEs company to choose the most appropriate technologies for themselves according to their journey into the digitalization era. This needs to be paired with guidance and support in making the investment decisions. And this can only be achieved through investing into flexible grants or vouchers earmarked for digital investment, incentives for the financial system to support and lend money to the SMEs for digital investment, training in sector relevant digital skills, and also sector specific online resources. Thus, if I would put it in a sentence, I would say high-speed connectivity and digital investments through vouchers, thus something easy to consume, training for digital skills and incentives for the financial systems to support SMEs. Back to you, Joe.
Katja, thank you very much. We are approaching near the end, so I'm going to ask you all to kind of keep your answers brief. I'm going to go to Sebastiano, please, from the SME Alliance. Some of the issues that was raised by Katja there apply across the board. Reform. The money will come from Europe via the member states, but there needs to be reform. I talked about upskilling, public administration needs to be improved, and cloud capacity. There's three things that Devin Bitcher from the Commission mentioned. Sebastiano, is that possible in a short time frame for small, medium companies who have been devastated by COVID-19? I'll ask you all to keep your answers brief after this.
Yes, Joy, thank you for the question. As a politician would say, it is indeed not an easy situation because we see many countries, we actually are not 100% sure that all the countries will be ready to absorb the investment that is coming through the recovery package, and that they will be ready to make the right decisions and ensure that this money reaches the SMEs in the right way. So there is, certainly a big challenge in terms of public administrations, how they handle this money and where their priorities are made. So what is certainly good in that respect, let me be clear, is that the role of the Commission in particular, that is really trying to coordinate and provide clear strategies and priorities how the money should be spent. So the role of the Commission is particularly important in giving clear instructions and guidance to the member states how the money should be spent. For instance, one concrete example that has been made perhaps is the one of digital innovation hubs, which are in charge of pretty much the digitalization of SMEs. This is one public initiative which is worth at least 700 million euros, so it's quite substantial. And it is very important because, believe me, even though the money is there, then the devil will be in the details, because what is extremely important is that the digital innovation hubs support the development of the digital transformation in the market, meaning we do not want to see organizations like universities or academia trying to digitize companies, because this is not something they are not there to do, and they will obviously fail. A university professor is there to teach courses and do research, not to go to an SME and transfer technologies to an SME. This is not their job. So the job of the digital innovation hubs, in our opinion, is to really make sure that the demand and the offer, especially at the local level, come together, that there is raising awareness, that SMEs understand what digitalization can do for them, and that the local providers, the local digital SMEs, will provide the technologies to the other SMEs. The digital innovation hubs can offer testing facilities, for instance, the user SMEs, to understand what they can do with the new technology. But the digital innovation hubs, therefore, have a big role to play, which is not to replace the market operators, but it is to help the market operators, because by doing so, they will help the ecosystem to grow and digitize as a whole. I mean, no SME is an island. They all live in ecosystems. If we help the ecosystems, then we will have a sustainable digitalization, Joy. Thank you for the question.
Sebastiano, grazie mille. Encore une demande pour Céline. Céline, a question for you if you're still there. The OECD has analyzed SME policy responses to the current COVID crisis. What role did digitalization play in those policies? Briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe, for the question. Yeah, briefly, and maybe a fun fact about this inventory that we did of policies to respond to the crisis. It is the work that we did is among the 5 papers on policy responses to the COVID that is the most viewed among the 160 responses that the OECD produced. So there is a very strong interest on helping the SMEs cope with the crisis. And the paper is 165 pages. So it tells something about the interest in the topic. But just in a nutshell, to tell you what we've seen through that inventory, we've seen that at the beginning of the pandemic, the policy responses were roughly similar and very much focused on emergency measures dealing with the liquidity crisis typically. But increasingly, what we're seeing with the recovery packages that are coming out now since the summer, more or less, is that countries are putting more in place more structural policies to help SMEs permanently adopt new working methods and digital technologies. So when it comes to digitalization, what does it mean? It means that initially the policies were mainly focused on addressing the urgent short-term challenges, typically the introduction of teleworking, helping SMEs channel new markets, put in place new ways of addressing their customers and sales. But increasingly now we see countries, still supporting SMEs in terms of their liquidity challenges, but moving also towards major investment plans. And this is typically the case. And let me name a few countries of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, but also, at the OECD level, Canada and Korea, where you can see very ambitious investment plans and that focus on, kind of expanding infrastructure, helping subsidizing SMEs access to this infrastructure. And this is a very welcome development. The last point that I wanted to make is because that gets us a bit concerned, that was raised before, which is the fact that to cope with the crisis, SMEs have massively taken on more debt. And of course, in the short term, there is the liquidity challenge and the insolvency risk that we see. But we believe that in the longer run, the risk associated with that is that SMEs will struggle to invest into the transition to the digital economy that we would like to see them take. And it means to us that governments have a key role to help in the future to actually help diversify financing instruments for SMEs so that those financing instruments do not add more on the debt pile of SMEs. So that's a key point that was actually at the core of the financing SME scoreboard that we launched yesterday and that we see as a key challenge going forward.
Merci. Thank you very much, Celine. And before I come to Manju with the final question, just to remind you that all of your questions that you've posed on the Q&A out there in the audience will be logged and will be made available. And we will do an edited video at the end, which will be shared with you as well. So don't worry if you missed something, if you had to nip out to the toilet or something like that, we will provide you the highlights, the action replays of everything that's been done. Manju, I'm going to give you the last word, if I may. Manju George from the World Economic Forum. You've heard a lot of stuff about the advantages that soft SMEs have, technology SMEs have. How can we help this digitalization process for those companies that aren't so soft, aren't so technologically advanced?
Thank you, Joe. And again, when we talk about the national strategies and implementation, they clearly, the context vary, the composition varies, the needs vary, so they need to be customized. And when you talk about the SMEs in sectors that are not technologically advanced, I think there is the skilling, the reskilling and investments in helping them navigate the various opportunities and services and technologies and tools that are available would be important. So the advisory services that David mentioned would be very important to offer. And I would say here, there are roles for both public and private stakeholders. I mean, banks, technology companies, mobile operators, civil society organizations all have roles to play. So sort of building a public-private ecosystem around those SMBs and helping them navigate this would be helpful. But I would say digital transformation is relevant for every SME, irrespective of the sector they are in. And so that is, there's customization needed, but that's inevitable. Perhaps one additional point I would make is on the cross-border work that needs to happen. It's not just within countries or within Europe, but how do we ensure cross-border trade and commerce is made easier and faster? And here, perhaps, examples like the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement between Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand, which is a concerted effort by countries, the three countries, to help and facilitate trade. I think things like that would be very, very helpful to implement.
Manju, thank you very much. I'm going to have to bring this panel to a close now. I'd like to thank Devon Beecher from DG Grow in the European Commission, Celine Kaufmann from the OECD, Katia Stakati, head of Vodafone Greece, Manju George at the World Economic Forum, and Sebastiano Toffaletti from the SME Alliance. Okay, everyone, straighten your tie, close your Facebook pages, and put down that coffee. The boss is here. We'd like to welcome Vodafone's Group External Affairs Director, Joachim Reiter, for his final thoughts on what we've learned today about SMEs on the road to digitalization. Joachim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Joe, for moderating what was an incredibly rich discussion. I will not do justice to try to summarize all that's being said. We've touched on a number of points. We covered everything from Italy, Spain, Greece, Ireland, and Ireland in quite some detail. We've covered from the European Parliament perspective, the Commission perspective, OECD, World Economic Forum, and Deloitte and others, as well as SME associations who gave voice and gave granular details on their type of challenges and the type of action they would like to see. I would like, in the interest of time, to just draw out a few points. There were a lot of common threads, and I thank all the speakers for the incredible contribution they made to the debate. But if I focus on 5 things, just also to stretch us, hoping that this seminar is not only one of coming together for this occasion, but actually really chart a course for where we want Europe to go to support this SME. My common threads are as follows. Number 1. SMEs are absolutely essential. They're the beating heart of our economy. They drive diversity and inclusion, as one of the speakers highlighted. They're essential for the local fabric and the local communities that are in desperate need of support. They therefore deserve a particular attention in whatever we do. And that was true also before COVID. But the sense of urgency of that particular attention of tackling the challenge of SMEs has become all the more important now in the COVID crisis. Many SMEs, as we heard from many of the speakers, are in deep distress, and we have a particular responsibility both on the public and the private side to overcome that. And I think what was greatly pointed out is that it will be our success on carrying the SME through this crisis will be the key determinant of the whole of Europe's recovery and future success, because it is an engine of recovery. My second point, and the common thread that I heard, was SME digitization represents a key lever as a means of making sure that SMEs survive this crisis, build the resilience, and come out of the crisis much stronger and can be an engine of growth. COVID itself has exposed the essential role that digitalization of SMEs plays. And we also heard that some SMEs have actually done giant leaps. So clearly, there are very large gaps remaining, but we also see some are making great strides. And I want to call out the fact that there is an opportunity, an untapped potential here that we need to get serious about. We've seen, and Liam, my colleague in Ireland, talk about it, catalyst for change, which I think is something we need to grasp. Digitized SMEs have 26% higher revenues than those that are non-digitized. Out of those that are currently not digitized, if we just took 100,000 of them and digitized them based on the average increase in revenues, you would actually add almost 150 billion turnover to European GDP. So the opportunity is immense if we give it the right attention. But it requires from all of us to have very open eyes around the specific barriers that is driving and causing this divide between large and small companies in our economy. And that's my third point. The reconstruction program and the reconstruction plan of the EU represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to actually get serious and try to address these gaps. The allocation of 20% to digital is, of course, a very, very important first step, and many people confess to that. But we also need, and we heard that, we need to have a very clear framework to target, with targeted interventions towards the SMEs. And I would like to call out, which was perhaps not as clear in the discussion during the course of today, that it must be, the reconstruction program must unleash additional private investment as well. The current digitalization transformation investment gap for the next 2 years is 250 billion euros. So while the EU Reconstruction Fund is very significant, it is more or less somewhere around 130 billion for digitization if you take 20% out of the 750. That's not going to be enough in itself to overcome the gaps that Europe is faced with, and certainly not going to be enough to overcome the gaps that we're seeing for SMEs. And that's my fourth point. So what targeted interventions did we actually call out during the course of today? And I would like to highlight three key targeted interventions and then some underlying features. First, hard infrastructure needs to be there. You can't drive digital Ferraris on copper gravel roads. And that's something that needs to now land, and that is something that requires a very significant push for investment into high-capacity networks, bridging those urban-rural divides that we talked about. Secondly, grants, vouchers to invest in digital tooling, including security, to overcome balance sheet problems that SMEs are struggling with throughout this crisis, but also even before that. Third, we heard very rich suggestions around capacity and capability building, advisory service, skills development, awareness building, training, innovation hubs, curated content, all the soft infrastructure that ensures long-term objective of what one speaker rightly talked about, sustainable digitization journey, which is a long-term journey. I think we also heard some speakers referring to the difference between sectors. We have horizontal actions that we have to take, and then also understand per market, there will be difference between member states, and we better have targeted interventions across the sectors that are where SMEs are most exposed. And all of that is then underpinned. I would like to thank a number of speakers raising the importance of the right policy and regulations to support that very ambitious agenda in the EU. And in that, the Commission really strongly encouraged reforms, which is something that may be forgotten as we go forward. The manner in which the reforms go hand in hand with the targeted interventions. And that leads me to my final point, my fifth and final point, if I may. I think from our point of view, it's clear that we have a huge degree of common understanding of the opportunity, but also the barriers and the challenges we need to overcome. However, we need to set the ambition right. If we're going to actually be successful, we better have a metric that allows us to measure our success. So what do we mean like? What does success look like if we're thinking about a digital decade for Europe and with focus on SMEs? I would like to suggest that all EU member states use the DESI, the Digital and Economic Society Index of the European Commission, and aim to achieve a 90% score. If they did that with the Reconstruction Fund and with the reforms that they're pursuing, that would be a GDP growth increase of 2.5% per annum going forward, and more than 7.5 million jobs created across the European Union. But more importantly, the big shift it would imply is that the biggest leap in GDP and in job creation would be among the laggards in digitalization today, both in the SME sector, but also the member states that are lagging behind. So we would drive significant economic convergence across the European Union. All of which to say, and to sum up, that we have a very big agenda ahead of us. Vodafone is 100% committed to ensuring that SMEs is at the forefront of our reconstruction program and the type of actions that we see going forward. We are happy to partner with both governments and other industry associations and with this sector and other sectors to try to drive this. It's sometimes forgotten why Vodafone feels so strongly about SMEs. We were a company that was created behind an Indian restaurant with a few blokes sitting literally in an office without any windows. And that, out of that, we have built a European champion with 100,000 employees and one of the largest digital companies in the European ecosystem. So we know very well the potential if you get your growth strategies right for SMEs and the potential it can have for driving future economic success of the European Union. And we are committed to do our part as the European Union strives to build back better by design. Thank you very much.
Tak, Joachim Reiter there, the Group External Affairs Director for Vodafone, for bringing to a close this morning's session, which focused on the road to recovery and the digitalization process for SMEs. I'd like to thank all our contributors from all over the world who put in a lot of time and effort, as well as those people behind the scenes who did a lot of work to make today happen. Thank you for all your messages. They will be logged. There will be an edited version of the event shared with you in due course. So stand by for that. And a synopsis of the event as an aid memoir. From me, Joe Lynham, thank you very much to all of you out there. Stay safe, stay well, stay digitized.